this is what we learned. The Mishnah just says that you're not allowed to wash on Yom Kippurim. Beginning with this sugya, we start to break that down and understand different aspects of washing. So the basic concept is that you're not allowed to wash for pleasure, and you're not allowed to wash even part of your body, much less your whole body. But if you are dirty, then you are allowed to wash. And similarly with sicha, right, with anointing yourself with oil, you're not allowed to do that even on the small part of your body, or not much less the whole body. But if you have some medical reason to put on oil, then you would be allowed to do that. Then we talked about this idea that when a woman is feeding her child on Yom Kippur, she has to wash the hand that she's going to use to feed him, because of something called shifta. And now we're up to another. So basically, we have this idea that you're not allowed to wash stam, but the exceptions to that are you're allowed to wash if it's for health reasons, or if it's because simply that you're dirty. And I think the health reasons, we have to include this idea of shifta, which they also viewed as a health issue, because the shifta was an issue of sakana. And we saw machloka between Rashi and Rabbeinu Tam about exactly what that is. But toch kedei, what we understood based on learning from the Tosfos with Rabbeinu Tam, we understand that regardless, when you get up in the morning of Yom Kippur, you would wash your hands 3 times the way you would do normally. That's considered to be something that you have to do on Yom Kippur, like the same way you do any other day, whether it's because your hands are dirty, because yadayim maraskaniyot, or whether because there's an issue of ruach ra'ah. And also because we discussed this last week, because you would also wash before you go to daven. So those are the things, the Sachakol, that we learned until now. Now we're going to introduce a new topic with this Braita. Tanur. So this is now toward the end of Ayin Zayin Amud Bet. Tanur Rabbanan, haolech lakbil pnei aviv, o pnei rabo, o pnei mi shegadol mimenu, over ad savaro b'mayim ve'eno choshesh. So now we give another exception to what we understand the rule to be with rechitza, that if you go to greet your father or your Rav, your master, or even to greet someone who is greater than you, you can go through water until your neck and not be choshesh, as Rashi says, mishum rechitza. You don't have to worry about rechitza. 1 second, just make sure that Paul is connected. Okay, Paul.
רק רגע. אוקיי. כן, רק רגע. מה שלומך? איך אתה הברית? How was the ברית מילה?
It was very sweet. I told a little bit before. I'll tell you more later. But I see that there's an interesting phenomenon that אף על פי שאני קראתי בשמונה, אבל משום מה אתה מגיע גם ב8:15. אין מה לעשות. זה קביעות כבר. Anyway, so now we're introducing a new category, seemingly, that so we had this until now. We talk about washing either because of health reasons, or maybe even ritual reasons like having to do with washing in the morning and washing before you daven. So that's all about washing. So what about just getting wet? In other words, when we talk about rechitza, what do we think rechitza means? So in the case of the woman feeding her child, it just said midicha isha yada, right? That she rinses her hand. So of course, yeshum hava amina that putting water on your hand or on your body for no reason on Yom Kippur should be asur, because you can look at it as rechitza. You can understand that that's a kind of rechitza. And so now we go even further here, where we're talking about going through a river or some kind of body of water, walking through water on Yom Kippur. So here, clearly, the idea is not even rechitza. The intention is not really to wash, but the reality is you're going to get wet. So until now, all the examples are instances where we were intending to wet our hands, and here the kavanah is that what do I want to do? I want to go and greet my Rebbe, or greet my father, or greet afilu misha gadol mimenu, right? Somebody who's greater than me, presumably somebody. What does that imply? What do you think that means to go and greet somebody greater than you? And why should that be? Why should any of these give a heter for getting wet on Yom Kippur?
Well, I mean, for the kavod of these figures, you don't want to be malodorous.
Do you think that's what's going on? That you are washing?
Yes.
Why would you say that?
Well, yeah. Or actually going through what? No, actually not necessarily, because you might have to cross a river to get to them. So it might not necessarily.
There you go. So right, let's keep this minimal. In other words, lehefech. In other words, this is what I mean. This Breita now is introducing a new concept, that you're not going through the river to wash. That's not your intent. But you have to go through a river or a lake or a body of water in order to get to somebody. So
if you want to go to shul and it's raining and you can't use an umbrella, you might get wet.
Yes, that's actually an even simpler example, which the Gemara doesn't bring, because
it's not raining in Eretz Israel.
Well, but it could have rained in Babel.
Yes, okay.
Could have rained in Babel, but and also Yom Kippur, it's not supposed to rain, but it could rain, right? It could be, but I think there it's because Zeh Yoter Barur. In other words, it's interesting you bring it up, because here I already gave you part of the way I understand this Breita, that why should it be that going through water on Yom Kippur to go and greet your father or your Rebbe or whomever, why should that be mutar? Why is that okay?
It might be considered washing, and so it's not going through the river. It's not your intent. You're not washing, and it's not for pleasure.
Oh, so this goes back to the concepts that we already have. So you're not washing. First of all, really, you're not washing in the sense that this is not your intention. It's a davar she'eno mitkaven, that you're getting wet altogether. So when we talked, right, so we talked earlier, we'd say, stam, you're not allowed to wash. But the first exception is you're allowed to wash if you're dirty. And the second exception is you're allowed to wash if you need to feed your child. right? So in other words, those are exceptions because there you're intending to wash when you wash to get rid of the dirt, and you're intending to wash before you feed your child. But you're not washing for pleasure. You're not doing that for pleasure. So here, when we come to over, right, that you're going through water, you're not intending to wash at all. That's not your intent at all. That is, if there was a bridge, you would walk over the bridge. But here we're talking about a case where apparently there is no bridge, and you need to get to the other side of whatever this body of water is. So we find out that here, when you have no kavanah at all to get wet, you are allowed to get wet if it's for the following reasons. If it's to go and greet either your father or your Rav or someone greater than you. Who do you think that would be, somebody greater than you? What does that mean?
A Talmid Chacham.
Yeah, it could just be a Talmid Chacham, even if it's not your Rebbe, right? So in Halacha, as you know, from other Mishnayot, we differentiate between like Rabo Muvhak, right? That you're the Rav that you learned most of your learning from has a special status. And that's Stam, that's Rabo. So for example, if you are confronted with returning a lost object to your father or to your Rav, to Rabcha Muvhak, then you return to the Rav first. The person you learned most of your Torah from is considered to be on a higher status in terms of respect, more even than your father, unless you also learned Torah from your father, even if he wasn't your Rav HaMuvhak, in which case then the father precedes. But in any event, we have this idea that you have like the father, then the Rav HaMuvhak. But here we say, even if it's not somebody as important as your father, or even somebody who's not as important as your Rebbe, but if it's somebody who's greater than you, and like Michael said, minastam, meaning what does it mean greater than you? Somebody who is more of a chacham than you are, that you should give them respect. So you're allowed to go through water even up to your neck, and you don't have to worry about washing on Yom Kippur. So very, interesting, right? So now that's fine. So that establishes this new category of getting wet on Yom Kippur, that you can get wet and it will not be considered rechitza if you're going through the water in order to show respect to somebody who's greater than you. But now the Gemara turns it around. Ibai. So they asked, so this is a classic Ibai. Ibai means they ask them, meaning people in the Beit HaMidrash ask the Rabbanim in the Beit HaMidrash this question. And Ibai always introduces a what-if question. I think we talked about this before, right? Until now, the questions that we've been dealing with have to do either with understanding the Mishnah or a contradiction between the Mishnah and a Braita and so forth. Now, at a certain point, the Gemara will go into, this is essentially a practical halachic question. So we're not worried about pshat. We know what rechitza is. We know we have a good idea of what it is and why we're not allowed to do it. But now we're just asking a halachic question. So now you just said you are allowed to go through water in order to greet somebody greater than you. But what about the other way around? Harav etzel talmid mai. the Rebbe, vis-a-vis his student, what is the did? So what question are they asking? What does it mean, the Rebbe vis-a-vis the student?
Can the Rebbe cross a river in order to reach a student?
In order to what?
Reach a student.
In order to reach a student, right? So wait, so before we go into the answer, so what did we think? Why was it okay to go through water to go see your Rebbe?
Out of the means the kavod creates an obligation.
So a big part of it apparently is you need to give kavod to your father or your Rebbe or whomever you need to give kavod to, and therefore the second part of it is, why is it permitted? Because it's also when you're walking through water, it's not really rechitza as we understand it. The way we've defined rechitza until now, we could understand that this is not rechitza because you're not intending to get wet at all. It's just a necessary function of going to see your Rebbe. So we have, but as Michael pointed out, we have this idea that in other words, the Breita doesn't say stam that one is allowed to walk through water on Yom Kippur, even if you're not intending to get wet. The heter is you're allowed to walk through water if it's to be makbil penei avicha or rabcha or mashalo yeh. But stam, the Breita doesn't say stam you're allowed to walk through water, even though you don't have any intention of getting wet. So this factor of giving kavod seems to be integral, right? It seems to be necessary. So now when we ask the question when the Gemara asks the question this way, so what about the other way around? What about the Rebbe going to see his student? Now, before see the Gemara's answer, so what might you think, based on what we learned now? Why is this a question? We'll put it this way. Why does the Gemara have this as a question? Why can't it deduce it from what we already know?
Because it's all about giving kavod to somebody who's greater. It would seem to be that this is all about giving kavod to somebody who is higher in rank, higher in kavod than you are.
Okay, so that's the first step is that we could make an argument that until now, this is our understanding. The reason you can go through water to see, I'm just going to take the example of the Rebbe, right? Is because you have an obligation to show honor to your Rebbe. But the opposite is not necessarily true. So why doesn't the Gemara say, well, obviously you can only go in one direction because the kavod, right, the lesser person has to give respect to the greater person. Why would I think at all that it's permitted for the Rebbe to go through water to see his student? He's not.
So what I can see sort of two possible explanations. One is that it's actually about the intimacy of the tie and not specifically about kavod or kavod as a function of the intimacy of the tie, or it's actually about teaching and learning, that the activity and teaching and learning is held in such high regard that one can go through water to in order to partake of it.
Very good. Both good points. So Yeshum Havamina, that what's really going on when we ask this question is about learning, because you notice the Gemara asks the question about the Rav vis-a-vis the Talmid. It doesn't say, what about the son? What about the father going to see the son? It doesn't ask that question. It asks the question specifically about the Rav going to see the Talmid. So it's reasonable to think that that the main issue that's going on here has something to do with Talmud Torah. And I might even say, maybe it's not so much about intimacy, because if it was about intimacy or a close relationship, then I could have also asked the question about the father going to see the son. But I dafka asked the question about Rav Eitzel HaTalmid. So that seems to be what's at issue. So we have this idea that perhaps it's because of the strength of Talmud Torah that there's something important. That's important enough that even the Rav, who is yoter mechubad than the Talmid, would be allowed to go through water, even though it would be close to Rechitza on Yom Kippurim. So the Gemara answers Tashema. So come and learn from here. Da'amar Rav Yitzchak bar Chana. So Rav Yitzchak bar Chana said, Ana chazite lezi'irei, da'azal legabe Rav Chia bar Ashi talmidei. So Rav Yitzchak bar Chana gives testimony. He said, Ana chazite, ani ra'iti oto lezeiri. Zeiri was the name. Who was the Rav, and he went to Rav Chia bar Ashi, his student. Now, how did he go? Presumably, it's a case where he had to go through water. In other words, that's not spoken, but in the context, we understand that that's what's going on, because otherwise, of course, the Rav can go to his student on Yom Kippur. There's no reason why he shouldn't. But here, the chidush is he can go even through water. So Rav Yitzchak bar Chana, he's not giving us a reason why it's mutar, but he's giving Maaser Rav. He's saying, I saw this happen. I saw this happen, that Zeiri went and visited his student. He had to go through water to see his student, Rav Chia bar Ashi. Now, Rav Ashi says, he had a different tradition in this story. He says, Hahu Rav Chia bar Ashi, that Rav Chia bar Ashi, hu da'azal legabe dezirei rabbe, said, actually, you got that wrong, Rabbi Yitzchak bar Chana. In that case, it really was the student who went to the master. Rav Chia bar Ashi, he went to Zeiri. So it's not a good proof. It doesn't. I can't use it as a Maaser Rav, because that's not what you're saying is not a reliable tradition. So we go on. We continue. Rava shara livnei avar yemina lema'avar b'mayr in turei firei. So Rava shara hu hitir livnei avar yemina, the people on the right side, he permitted them to go through water to guard fruit. So let's explain this a little bit. The right side of what? Where did he? What did he allow them to go from the right side of?
A river.
Presumably a river. Which side is the right side? So
Then what, the side that you're on.
So that's the thing. He doesn't. In other words, he could have said it that way, but we actually touched on this a while back when we were learning some things about the layout of the Beit HaMikdash. When you learn in Nach about the sides of the Beit HaMikdash, Tzad Yamin of the Beit HaMikdash is the south side. And why do we say it's the south side? Because if we think of the Beit HaMikdash as looking out, so it starts in the west and it's looking toward the east, right? So it means the right side, based on that, the right side of the Beit HaMikdash is the south side. The north side would be the left side, right? If you said, and we mentioned that there's this idea, because there's an idea that the Beit HaMikdash had attributes that were like a lion. It was like a lion looking out because it was built on a slight slant, like a lion crouching. So it's Kilo looking out. So Stam Yamin as a direction would be south. So that's presumably what it means here as well. So Rava, he allowed people who lived on the south side of the river, whatever particular, I guess we could probably figure that out. It doesn't matter. People who are on the south side of the river, they could go through water on Yom HaKippurim to guard fruit. So, what does this tell us? How does this help us in our question? What was our question? And how does this help us answer the question?
The question is whether the heter of going through water to see, I mean, if a student or somebody of lesser rank going to somebody of greater rank also works, if that heter also applies to, say, a master or a teacher going to see a student. And the way that this would help answer the question is that if somebody is going to cross a river in order to engage in an activity that doesn't have any particular kavod, that doesn't have any particular mandate, like guarding fruit, then kol v'chomer, it should apply to a master to a teacher going to see his student.
Very good. Very, very well said. So yes, so Rava is introducing this because he's saying, I don't necessarily have a particular tradition regarding the master going to see the student, but I do know that, I'm sorry, this isn't Rava speaking. This presumably is either the Stam Gemor or Ravashi who's speaking, because Ravashi rejected the story that Rav Yitzchak Bar Bar Chana gave, which was a dut that a master did go to see a student. He said, no, actually, that's the student who went to see the master. But Rava allowed people to even go through water to go and guard their fruit on Yom Kippur, which has, as Michael said very well, this was not a matter of showing any kind of kavod. It had nothing to do with Talmud Torah. And b'chol zot, he allowed it. So kol shekain, if you're going for reasons of Talmud Torah, that you should be allowed to do it. So that's the edut we have vis-a-vis Rava. Amar le Abaye le Rava. But now we're going back to when Rava must have given this heter. So Abaye says to Rava, Tanya de Messiah, there's a braita that supports you. And the Braita says, Shomrei Perot Ovrin ad Savaran b'mayim ve'en chosheshin. There's a Braita that essentially says exactly what you just paskened, that people who have to guard their fruits on Yom HaKippurim can go through water up till their necks and not worry about Rechitza on Yom Kippur. So far, so good. So we support this idea. One second. we support this idea that you're allowed to go through water in order to guard, essentially to guard your property on Yom Kippur. Certainly you would be allowed to go for reasons of Talmud Torah, whether you're, even if you're the teacher going to the student. And then in addition to that, you're also allowed to go through water on Yom Kippur, apparently to show respect to someone who is greater than you, even if it doesn't involve Talmud Torah per se, like going to see your father, which may or may not involve Talmud Torah, or going to see someone who is greater than you. Okay, good. Rav Yosef, so now we continue in this line. Rav Yosef, Shar Lahu Livnei Beit Harbu, L'me'avar b'maya l'meite l'firka, l'meizal lo Shar Lahu. So Rav Yosef, Shar Lahu, who itir lahem, Livnei Beit Harbu, to the residents of Beit Harbu, which was, as Rashi says, the name of a village. He allowed them to go through water, l'meitei l'firka, to go to a shiur. As Rashi explains, the firka shayu dorshim b'yom kippurim, right? So, in across the river from Beit Harbu, somebody was giving a shiur on Yom Kippur, and Rav Yosef allowed them to go to the shiur even though they had to go through water. L'meizal lo shara lahu. But to return, to leave and come back, he did not allow them. So why didn't he allow them to come? Why did he allow them to go? Why didn't he allow them to come back?
So he allowed them to go because he held that one could go across a river for the sake of Talmud Torah. But going back, there's no reason Talmud Torah, so.
Right, presumably the reason that would allowed him, the reason that gave him the heter to give you the heter to cross was Talmud Torah. Once the shir is over, the reason is gone. So basically, if you go, then you have to stay there until the end of Yom Kippur. Amarei Abaye, Ibken, Atamachshilan Latid Lavo. If that's so, then you will have them stumble in the future. Right? So what is he saying?
They will be they'll be reluctant to go to more shiurim.
Okay, so let's just, I'm sorry, I want to be a little more meduyak. Im kain, if that's so, if what is so?
If he did not give permission for them to go back.
So if you don't give permission to go back, then what?
Then people will be reluctant to go.
People will be reluctant to go, and so what?
And so they will not engage in the Talmud Torah on Yom Kippurim.
So yes, so you'll keep them from going to shiur and learning on Yom Kippur. Where else did we see this concept? Something we discussed a long time ago.
I believe in the context of in the context of bringing a notice for bringing news of the sighting of sighting the molad, sighting the new moon. That one's permitted to go on Shabbat and return on Shabbat.
Actually, if you're outside of the Tchum, you can't return on Shabbat, but there is a similar concept. You're correct in relating it to that. Does anyone remember what there was an original din, and then the din was changed because Rabban Gamliel was worried that people would not come.
Ah, right, okay, so he basically, everybody who comes has the heter, even if the new moon has already been announced, even if, somebody's already come and sort of given the news.
They have what heter?
The heter to go outside the Tehum in order to bring news of Rosh Chodesh on Shabbat.
All right, so that's true, but that doesn't solve this question. So we know that it's permitted for anybody who sees the new moon. We know that they have a heter to go outside of the Tehum. Everybody has that heter. What's the problem? Once they get to Yerushalayim, what happens? So they come to Yerushalayim, they give testimony, and then what? Now they have a problem.
Then they need to leave the precinct and get, find lodging and sort of all these other, all the things they need to take care of.
You're ad-libbing. It's clever, but it's not on point. You're just ad-libbing. No, Michael, you remembered the inyan, but you didn't remember the specifics. So here's the thing. Anybody who, once you leave the Tchum on Shabbat, you're only allowed to walk 4 amot in any direction. So here, to begin with, everybody who is coming outside of the Tchum, they had permission to go even way beyond the Tchum and walk more than 4 amot. But once they give testimony, then that heter died. They don't have any reason to go any more than 4 amot in any direction. So Rabban Gamliel made a takana that he allowed them to go anywhere in Yerushalayim. Because if not, he was afraid that people wouldn't come, because they would end up being stuck in some corner for the rest of Shabbat. So that's one case. There's an earlier, chronologically, historically, there's an earlier case that we touched on a long time ago. That's more like this. In other words, in the case that we just brought, there was a heter that was created in order that people would not be reluctant to come and give edut, but it didn't allow them to go back home on Shabbat. It just allowed them more area to walk around. Where do we have a case of a heter, something that was done on Shabbat, but that once it was done, you weren't allowed to go back until a takana was made?
Oh, I believe that carrying the shofar or
No,
no,
for
no,
sure
no,
not,
no,
because we
no,
didn't.
no, no, no.
There was never a heter to carry a shofar on Shabbat.
Oh, there's something.
Once there was a gzeirah,
Right.
that's it. We don't do it. Okay, I'm gonna trying to think how I can trick your memory, but I'll just tell you. This goes back to when we were talking about it's when we were learning Masechet Ta'anit, I believe. There's an idea that if you need to go out to war on Shabbat, so you're allowed to take your weapons, and if the battle finishes, you are allowed to come back home, even with your weapons. Because the fear was people would not be willing to go out to fight on Shabbat if they knew that they wouldn't be able to return on Shabbat without their weapons. So that's a much earlier takana that goes back to the time of the Chashmonaim. So that's where the concept comes from. There's an idea that to go out to war on Shabbat as in a defensive war, that's, first of all, I should say it's obvious that that's mutar. The truth is it wasn't obvious. Not everybody thought it was obvious. And because of that, people would die. People thought it's Shabbat, I'm not allowed to do this. And then people would get slaughtered or towns would get overrun or whatever. So there was Bichal, it was a takana, people understood that you're not just allowed, but you know, if you can, you have a duty to wage defensive war, even on Shabbat. But then beyond that, there was an idea that you can't just let people go to war. Then what if that war finishes on Shabbat and they want to go home? You have to let them go home with their klei zayin. You have to let them go home with their weapons, because otherwise they'll be reluctant to go out to war at all. So now, similarly, I have this idea. Rav Yosef, he allowed people from Beit Tarbu to go across, to cross the water to go hear a shir, but he didn't allow them to come back. Amarei Abaye, so Abaye says, in Cain, if that's the way you paskin, that you allow them to go through water to come to the shir, but you don't allow them to return through water after the shir, then you'll machshilam latidavo. As Rashi says, the shana acher lo yavo ho'il v'lo yitartem la'avor et hamayim v'lachzor. In the future, people won't go to the shir. They won't come to shir because you didn't allow them to go through water in order to return. So it's a similar concept. So very good. We have this to add, right? So once the concept was created, then it has legs. That is, it's not. So let's just wind this back. So you're not allowed to wash on Yom Kippur. We know that there's certain exceptions. We've introduced the exception that you're allowed to go through water where it is not your intent to wash, but you're allowed to go through water in order to, even in order to guard your property. And certainly you're allowed to go through water in order to learn. But now I'm going to add one more layer, that I'm going to let you return through water, even though there's no to'elet per se, right? There's no, you're not gaining anything from going back, except that you want to go back home. But you're not going to guard your property. You're not going to hear more Torah. So why should you be allowed to go through water at all to come back? Because of this concept. This is that unless we let you do it, you won't go to the shir. So this applies for when you're going for the shir note, right? We don't necessarily have reason to believe that this would apply to the Shomrei Perot. People who are going to guard their property, who guard their fruits, what if they want to come back through the water in Yom Kippur? I might not give them that heter, because maybe I don't care if they go and guard their fruits. I shouldn't say I don't care, but let's say there isn't a mitzvah per se to go and guard their fruits on Shabbat. So I don't know. Like at this moment, I would have that as a bit of a question. What if you just went across the river to check on your pardesim, right? To check on your orchards? Would you be allowed to come back? Maybe not, because the only heter I see is people when Rav Yosef let people go for shir, and then Abaye says you have to also let them come back. Let's continue on a little bit. Ika da amri sharalahu lemete v'sharalahu lemezal. Some people say he let them go and he let them come back. Who let them go and who let them come back, and who did that, and who was the they?
I think it's Rav Yosef. We let them go for the shir, the people of Beit Tarbo.
Very good. In other words, Ika da Amri, some people say some people had a different version of events regarding this story with Rav Yosef. So Rav Yosef, he let the people from Beit Tarbut go through the water to hear a shir, and he also let them return. Not like the way so then what did Abaye, in this version, what did Abaye say to him? Amar Abaye, Bishlama Lemeise L'chai. Says, okay, if you say, like, it's fine that they go, L'chai, like, it's, it's good, like L'chaim, it's like, whatever. No, there was a word I had in my mind, but I can't.
Adrabah.
No, it's not adarabah. It's like chazak, kilo b'seder. Yishlam l'mesid l'chayim, like sheyeg. Let them go. That makes sense.
Bruchim yiyu.
Bruchim ti, right? Yeah, that something like that. Yeah. Bruchim tiyu. Ela l'meid.
תבורכו.
איך?
תבורכו. שתהיה לכם ברכה.
כן, שיהיה להם ברכה. They should be gesund. My time. But to come back, what's the reason? So in this version, what's different in this version than in the first version?
In the first version, he didn't let him come back. The Abaye questioned it, that he should have, because it would prevent him in the future. Here, he's letting him come back, and Abaye is giving the reason for it.
Well, the Abaye is asking, so here Abaye is questioning, why should you allow them to come back? And this last line, who says that?
Rabbi Yosef,
So
in response to Abaye's query.
Right, so there are really two possibilities, but the first, I would also say my first inclination is to say this was Rav Yosef replying to Abaye. Rav Yosef let these people go and come back. Abaye says, "What? Let them go. I understand, but why do you let them come back?" And he says, "I let them come back. The other possibility is what Michael Schwartz said. It could be that Abaye is altogether there just to give an interpretation of Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef let them go and come back. Abaye said, why does he let them come back? I'll tell you why. Because is there any halachic distinction between the first case and the second case?
Still,
Yeah.
it looks like that at those times the tefillah at the shul wasn't that long, wasn't long as it is today, because they did have time to go to visit somebody and even have a shiur. But if you have to go to the Beit Knesset for the whole day, you can't even have a shiur.
I know. I'm glad that you raised this, because I was thinking this the whole time when I'm going through this. Like, I'm thinking, like, Yom Kippur, they have to walk through water to go hear a shiur. They're going to have time to do that, to hear the shiur, and they're still going to have time to come home. Clearly, they weren't in shul all day. But of course, it makes sense that they weren't in shul all day, in the sense that, not that it couldn't have been, but
there were no piyutim at that time.
If they had, I don't know if there were not, but we don't know. I have a feeling there probably were something like piyutim, but not like we have. Because the piyutim that we have in the Bechol Tfutzot Yisrael, like, because you have them mamash from Europe, and you have from the Middle East, like, people, it's over the centuries, Chazanim often would write them, or people for the Chazanim would write them, And it makes, and you know, they on Yom, and the ones that stuck in most were the ones for Rosh Hashanah and especially for Yom Kippurim, right? Because we also have we have a mode of piyutim for the regalim. We mostly don't say them, right? We just say usually just parts of them. But you know, now you can get these editions. They'll show you like the parts that, like, you know, Tain Tal and things like that. That's like just a part of a much longer piyut. Because on regalim, people want to go home and eat. On Yom Kippur, people also want to go home and eat, but they can't. And I think there was also, you know, over the centuries, probably the you know, the Rabbanim and the Chazanim wanted to keep the people in shul so that they wouldn't be tempted. I'm guessing. And also, like, what else was there for them to do? But yeah, you see that. In any event, I want to finish this part up. So, is there any difference between the first version of this story and the second version of the story halachically? Is there any halachic difference?
Am I correct in remembering that Abaye holds more weight than Rabbi Yosef? Or the opinions of Rabbi Abaye hold more weight than the opinions of Rabbi Yosef?
So if he did, therefore what? So what are you getting at?
So therefore, this explanation, if in fact this explanation comes from Rabbi Abaye, it would hold more weight than if it came from Rabbi Yosef.
So here's the thing. What you're getting at is what I just want to point out. What you're doing, what you're doing is very good. In other words, when we look at the discussion, the halachic discussion, if I take away the names, there is no difference. In both cases, we have what comes out halachically is the idea that one is allowed to go through water on Yom Kippur to go hear a shiur, and they're allowed to go through water to come back from the shiur. I get that from both versions of the story. So then, what else? Is there any other reason to think that there's a halachic difference? The only other reason to think there might be a halachic difference is who said what. Was it significant? Is it significant that Abaye gives the heter? Or is it more significant that Rav Yosef gives the heter? So, Abaye against Rav Yosef, I'm not sure. I honestly, I have to look into that. So, you know, the regular. I'm not sure. I'm not sure if Abaye has a greater halachic weight than Rav Yosef, but what you're raising is a good question. In other words, it might make some difference, except that what I would say here, it probably is not. Nonetheless, here it probably won't make a difference, because once the concept of Kadesh lo lachshilan la'atid lavo is introduced, nobody argues with that. In either version, that concept is accepted. So that's what we're up to. So I think this is a good place to stop. And next time we will pick up from here, Rav Yehuda, Rav Shmuel bar Rav Yehuda, and it's going to continue in this line. And if you have time, you should read ahead to the next part of the sugya. And it's going to go into, kind of an interesting drasha, which is pertinent to the halachic issue. You can read through Yechezkel Perek Mem Zayin, if you haven't read it before. It's a famous passage. So that's it for today. Any last questions, comments? criticisms? No. Shkoyach. See you next week.
Thank you, good night.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.